There are benefits to diversity, and then there are drawbacks to diversity. Okay, one of the benefits to diversity, when instituted properly, is that it can help people. It can bring different ideas to the table and then maybe create greater things. But if diversity is brought in, but one of the people in that diverse class is greatly less experienced and looked down upon by the rest of the group, then the benefits of diversity are often canceled, because it's actually stereotypes are reinforced, and so you have to be careful when thinking about diversity, because diversity is works best when everybody's on an equal playing field. And then the issue now becomes, well, actually Harvard is not putting everyone on an equal playing field. They're actually admitting people who are vastly less qualified into the same student body as people who are more qualified in the name of diversity. And then also to that point, racial diversity is not the only diversity that's there. And it is a stereotype to suggest that all Asian Americans are faceless math robots. And of course, I think that's what's implied in that statement. I'm not saying you're implying it, but definitely Harvard admissions officers think of it this way. There have been several sources.
Some sort of homogeneousness about the Asian class that they don't want to get out of hand. Some sort of homogeny.
Yeah. I talk about, in my book, I talk about some of the people who were rejected from Harvard, or actually one guy posed as a white student. And this was during the Harvard admissions case, and he was just chatting with the admissions counselor officer at Harvard, and he asked him about the Harvard discrimination case. The admission officer said, "Oh, well, what these people need to realize is that these Asians, are just lower personality people." So, I mean, it's cultural at Harvard. It's very culturally embedded, this idea that Asians are homogenous robots. Even though,
do you know what personality is meaning in that statement? Lower personality.
So Harvard evaluates people. Harvard evaluates people on 3 metrics: academics, extracurriculars, and personality. Academics, Asian Americans perform better than whites, but perform better than every other group. Extracurriculars, Asian Americans perform better than whites, better than every other group. This is all based on public data gathered from the admissions case that anybody could easily look up. And then personality scores. Funny enough, Asians score just as high as whites in alumni recommendations. They score almost as high as whites in teacher recommendations, but they score higher than blacks and Hispanics in teacher recommendations. The objective measurements, Asians are doing just fine in so-called measurements of personality, which are measurements of likability, humor, leadership, charisma, everything like that. But then in the overall personality rating, so odd, Asian Americans score the lowest out of all of the races, including blacks and Hispanics. And it's actually really funny.
Some magical thing happens where the personality just kind of evaporates.
Just dissipates, yeah.
Goodness.
It just dissipates somewhere in between the application process and the final review process. The Asian personality just dissipates into the ether.
So that's a bias then. It's biased according to whoever's doing these reviews then.
Yeah, I mean, whoever's doing the reviews is showing some kind of strong bias against these Asian Americans in their application process. Yeah. And we're not sure. It could be that they genuinely think Asian Americans are this way because of a stereotype, or it could be that they're just using the personality score as a proxy for race. Yeah. And either way, it's pretty cynical and it's pretty bad.
That's insulting. It's incredibly insulting.
Yeah, this is why so many Asian Americans have gotten really fired up over this case, because it basically feeds into every stereotype that they've heard it used against them, for a very long time. And we're supposed to be a country that's progressing against that, but Harvard is reinforcing it in the elite.
Yeah. But they will trot out #StopAsianHate when it suits them. maybe I'm kind of straw
yeah.
manning here, but there's just something disgusting about the slander that I see in progressive circles, and by progressive circles I mean specifically academic programs that argue that Asians are white adjacent or complicit in white supremacy, and they'll be very derogatory towards Asians. But then when something happens that can be racially motivated towards a Black Lives Matter kind of cookie cutter protesty thing, then they'll let the Asians back in when the Asians are the victims. But when Asians are the victors, then they're on the bad side of the line. I don't know how you would square that as a community. And I know the Asian community, Asian American community is incredibly diverse. So it's even wrong to even think of them as a community, but how that community over time, if this continues, won't become more and more resentful towards whoever's promulgating that, which would be the Democratic Party, progressive circles, and then these elite institutions.
Well, I mean, Asians, and this is why my book is called An Inconvenient Minority, because Asians are only used in this progressive narrative when it's convenient. I mean, they're used conveniently. When it comes to stop Asian hate, Asians are victims. Of course, victims specifically of white supremacy. Forget and ignore the fact that 28% of Asians who faced anti-Asian crimes were targets by Black Americans, and then 25% of them were targeted by white Americans. So they're actually targets of crimes at a higher rate by Black Americans than by white Americans. But of course, it's a function of white supremacy. But okay, so they're victims when it's convenient for them in that case. But in the case of education, they're overworking, they're overachieving, test-taking robots who are white adjacent, right? They're on the side, they're trying to put Asians into a box with the oppressor at that point, which is whites. So this is why Asians inconvenience the narrative, because there's actually truth in both claims, interestingly enough, because Asian Americans have been victims of discrimination in the United States. I mean, Chinese exclusion, Japanese internment, everything that went on there, hugely detrimental to the Asian American groups here. But yet they have achieved in our country. They have a higher graduation rate, they have higher educational attainment, they have higher household income than even whites. And what that does is it puts a big hole in the left's narrative that your race is what determines your ability to achieve in this country, because Asian Americans are a racial minority who have been discriminated, and yet they still achieve.
Yeah, well,